Chapter 16. The aftermath of the fight was beyond anything Nina had ever dreamed of. A battle of heroes or monsters, something like this. She thought, clutching her staff and staring around her in a daze. People don't even get to see this once in 100 years. And it took place here, in a little village. When Moman returned through the gate and Lupu walked away from the corpse of the blonde killer to go and greet him, the spell was broken and cheers erupted. Torches were in many hands by then. The resolute words of Henry Emmett electrified the crowd, and from it was born a confidence not one village of humans had held in itself for 600 years. If my own village had been like this one, would I have been taken? No. No, not a chance. Lupu was right. Nina thought to herself, her eyes transfixed on the blood-soaked cleric who traded words that Nina couldn't hear over the cheering in the night. Torchlight cast shadows and light about, making every man and woman taller and stronger and more active by their shadows. Nina turned her attention to Henry. The resolute villager's entire body began to shake as she shed the fear from the prior events now that things had calmed down. Calm or not, however, the village was not going back to sleep. The wounded were gathered and brought forward. It was difficult not to pity them when she heard the village elder say, "Moman, sir, we suffered many injuries in the fighting against the undead. Could we ask for your partner to heal them? They know about the ban, now. So sad, they'll..." Nina stopped the thought cold as a corpse when she heard Moman's answer. "Lupu, go ahead, as long as nobody at the guild finds out, it will be no problem." His majestic voice when he looked down at the red-stained, red-haired cleric was like oil thrown into flames. There was nobody who didn't know what was being asked. He's risking his career as an adventurer, just to help some pathetic nothing village. Nina clenched her jaw and jogged over. "It hurts, but I have to stop him, or at least warn them." Mr. Moman. "Miss Lupu. If you do that and the guild finds out, you'll be expelled. You won't be adventurers anymore." Nina stammered out her objection over the groans of the dozen wounded. They had long, deep tears in their flesh, bite marks where entire chunks of flesh had been torn away in the most desperate moments when only raw courage kept the wall from being overrun. Shame washed over Nina when she stood in the way of his effort at healing the wounded. Someone like that, so noble, strong, there are many lives they're destined to save, many great things they're destined to do. I can't just let them throw it away for people like me. Nina screamed in her head and silently begged for forgiveness from herself and from the groaning men and women. It was enough to give Moman pause, however, and he glanced down at Lupu. "That's true. But it is not true if they are part of our party. Am I correct about the laws here? You can heal party members without concern for the temples?" Moman asked her, and Nina gave a shaky nod of her head. "Yes, but you..." She snapped her jaw shut. "Then we are taking the entire village into our party. There is no limit to the number of members a party can have, is there?" Moman spread out his hands, and even the wounded ceased their groans to stare. No, not technically, but..." Dine interjected. "And you can add party members whenever you wish as long as you register them afterward, right?" Moman pressed on. It was Britta who was the first to start laughing. She clutched her belly and lost all control, doubling over with outrageous laughter, and from there, Lucret joined her, followed by Peter, Dine, and at last, a disbelieving Nina. From there it spread to the whole village. "Moman, sir, what is your party called?" Henry asked, struggling to hold back the laughter at his outrageous proposal. "Axel." Dines replied in an instant. "I don't understand." "Why Axel, sir?" Henry asked. "It's such a small thing. Most teams go for something fearsome or large." "Because the wheel turns on it." Dines replied, and then it became a whisper. The whisper became a chant. The chant became a cry like those of warriors in a battle line. "Axel. Axel. Axel. Axel." The word became more in the eyes of those who breathed it like a sacred name. "Get to work, Lupu, heal the team." Moman ordered, and the bloody cleric with a broad and vicious grin went from body to injured body, restoring them to their full strength and health again. Bloody wounds vanished and the wounded were whole once more. The victory, the healing, the unexpected salvation from unexpected danger, a notion of confidence was theirs and they had energy to boot. Nobody wanted to sleep. Instead, the many torches came together to form a bonfire and an impromptu festival was held. Food and drink went about, Music was played by those few with instruments, songs carried into the darkness around the village, and carried on till beyond the break of dawn. It was only with the coming of the light, the piercing rays of the sun as they chased away the night and illuminated the true nature of what the village had survived the night before, that brought home how close they had truly come to annihilation. Nemu clung to her big sister and whimpered when she saw the bodies of the zombies being loaded into carts. Henri clung to the little girl, and felt her own sense of relief when Fia clung to her in turn. "They really saved us there, didn't they?" Henri asked without looking up at him. "They really did. I owe them everything," Fia said, his words and face more grim and resolute than Henri had ever known him to be. "We owe you also, Henri Emmett," the village elder said when he approached her, a hand folded behind his back, and the other held in the hand of his wife. She turned her attention to him and picked up Nemu to clutch her close. "What?" Henri asked. "Without that wall, without the goblins, we would have suffered terribly. You insisted on both, and that bought time for salvation. I argued against both the use of that item and against the extra work spent on the wall. I thought archery practice was enough. I was wrong. I was wrong, and I think my time as elder is done," the old man added. Henri's bright eyes widened. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. The heavy thud of a zombie corpse being dropped onto a pile was louder in her ears and in her own mind than it probably was in reality. Past the old man, in the distance, the remains of the two skeletal dragons loomed larger than she imagined any creature could ever truly be. "Because I think you should be the next chief. You were the mind behind the work we did. The whole village will support you. And if you need an old man's advice, I'll offer what I can," the old man said in a self-deprecating fashion with a little wry smile on his wrinkled face. "You don't have to answer right now, dear. Things are still hectic and a lot drunk," he chuckled. Most of the villagers were not busy working on clearing out the bodies. They were instead clearing out their bellies by throwing out the hours of alcohol consumption. "Think about it for a bit." "Oh, I will," Henri stammered, and the couple left her alone. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lupa said when she eventually approached. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Henri shot the words out with divine reverence and fell to her knees in front of the red-haired cleric. She looked up at the blood-soaked woman. "I don't know how you fought like that, and I don't care. You saved us. You fought for us. I can't thank you enough." Nfia went down to his knees beside the woman he loved. "She's right. Without you two, I'd have lost everything, probably even my life. She was definitely after me, but why?" "Hey," Lupa chuckled a little, "you two put on a good show. I couldn't very well let her ruin it." She paused to let their blushes return. "But as for why they wanted you? I don't know, but I'll bet there's a way to find out." Hours passed and the many bones of the skeletal dragon were hauled toward the outskirts of the village under Peter's direction. Ein saw the young warrior giving instructions to a score of peasants working with their carts, lining them up in a caravan formation. Curious, he approached the youth. "Peter, what exactly are you doing?" Ein asked, watching the peasants load the bones into the cart. The constant clatter and rattle grew loud as burly peasants, some less sober than others, worked to tie square cloths over top of high stacks of the remains. "Gathering the evidence for your promotion, of course, Mr. Moman," Peter said with absolute deference in his voice, fully respectful. When the young man looked up, Ein saw that Peter's eyes shone like he was staring at an idol. "I don't understand," Heinz replied and took off his helmet to scratch his head. Peter laughed. "You're too humble, Mr. Moman. Forget chopping ogres in half. You alone killed 2 skeletal dragons and a magic caster. Your partner killed a woman who I can only assume was an adamantite-ranked warrior." His eyes fell. "If we'd had to face her, she would surely have killed us all. Her armor was covered in adventurer plates, trophies, I guess. There's copper, iron, silver, gold, mithril, and even orichalcum. That narrows down her skill level a great deal, and Lupu not only beat her, she beat her easily. So, we'll transport all this back to Irantal with us, get signed witness statements from the whole village, and you'll get the plate you deserve." "I see," Ein said and thought, "that will make spreading my name much easier." Gratitude rose up, so he reached down and put a heavy armored hand on the young warrior's shoulder. "I won't forget your thoughtfulness. But do you think we'll be leaving today?" Peter thought that over. "That's up to our client, but I think we will, yes, at least long enough for him to go back and see his grandmother." The roar of those skeletal dragons was really something. Who knows how far away they were heard? They were also very clearly visible against the moon when they were up high, so they were visible for miles around. Anyone who saw or heard them would go straight for the Adventurers Guild. If we wait too long, they'll send an investigation and suppression team. Right, we shouldn't waste time then. Heinz answered with a decisive air and drew his hand away. Oh, and by the way, we found this on the ground next to the magic caster's body, Peter said, and held out a pouch. I had Dine tap it with a staff into a pouch. We don't know what it does, but it looked dangerous and definitely magical. You killed the man though. By common adventurer custom, you keep what you kill outside of a team fight. Heinz reached down and took the little brown cloth pouch. His respect for Peter went up another notch. Loot law for parties in the game seems to have been picked up here by adventurers. Good for him to keep it up. The appreciative thought was quickly concealed by his collector's avarice, and when the pouch was in hand, he opened it up. A little black ball sat at the bottom of the pouch. Yes, that's right, I remember it now. He held this out and used it to heal the skeletal dragons. Heinz called up the image to his mind and then sealed it up and cinched the pouch tightly to his belt. Thank you, Peter, Heinz said with the utmost sincerity. If Peter planned to say anything in return, Heinz never knew. Because in the next instant, a gut-wrenching, heartbroken wail stopped everybody in their tracks, and it was coming from just inside the walls. Chapter 17. Lupus Regina was standing over the wailing Fia and scratching her head. What's wrong with you? All I said was go through the dead meats things and see if there's anything useful there. Why does that merit a bunch of tears? Did she turn out to be a childhood friend gone wrong or something? Fia's hand shook, the hair that hung down in his eyes hid the worst of his expression. His knuckles were white from the tension. He didn't look up at the red-haired beauty, he only stared down at the closed fist and sobbed. He heard Lupu's question repeated, a little more sharply, more commanding. His shaking fist became shaking fingers as they opened slowly to reveal what lay within. A plate. Obviously very old, obviously worn. A name sat emblazoned on it. Lizzie Ben Fia whispered her name like a prayer, tears ran down his face and he said it again. Lizzie Bear. That was my grandmother's name. Lupus Regina's face formed a deep frown. The only casualty of the whole trip is one person who wasn't with us, go figure. Fia's shaking fingers dropped the little mithril plate. Henry, however, caught it immediately, and put her arm around his upper back while she held the plate in his stead. Grandmother, Fia mumbled through his sobs, that must have been how this one. He waved a hand to the torso of the woman who identified herself as Clementine, found me. She must have done something to grandmother, mind control magic or something, and found out I would be here. Lupus Regina Beta felt the orgasmic bliss rise in her as she watched the twisted emotional suffering of the two humans. She'd helped bring the two together. In her own playful way. The brief time knowing them had led to her finding enjoyment in their antics. Now they were suffering one of the worst losses they possibly could. And the smiling sadist couldn't have been happier about it. Yes. Yes. Oh. Yes. Her mind screamed out as she was flooded with pleasure that left her trembling with unrivaled excitement, the sort of which she'd never felt before. The battlemaid's legs trembled so much her knees almost knocked, and finally she could stand no more, and fell with a thud. Knees hit the dust and scattered small clouds. She all but wept with the bliss of the moment. Wow, she barely knows us. But she's such a good friend already. She's so hard hit by how Fia feels. She feels his pain like it's her own. What a good woman, Henry thought, and after putting the plate back into Fia's hand, she gently reached out to put her palm on Lupus' thigh. Henry gently pressed down on the soft green fabric of the traveling pants. Hey, Miss Lupu. You couldn't have known. This isn't your fault. You protected us. That's good enough. You couldn't know they were going after Fia's grandmother. The young man nodded without looking up, his eyes still latched on the mithril plate that Henry pressed into his hand before touching Lupu's thigh. Though he couldn't yet look up, he could speak, and did. Yeah, don't blame yourself. This was just a thing that happens. And you made it right as anyone can be. You killed her killer for me. You're amazing. Beyond amazing. For the rest of my life, I'll be thankful to you both. It took the battlemaid a moment to regain her breath from her moment of bliss. When she did, she put her hands on their heads and tousled them gently before saying, "Thank Moman, not me." Lupu gave a very small, indulgent grin, Everything I do for him first. You're a team. That's to be expected. But still, thank you, too, Nfia said when her hand withdrew. He stopped for another round of sobs, then picked up his words again. I still need to process this. Just give me some more time. He watched as Lupu gave him a polite nod, and when Henry came around to comfort him, he let his head rest in her chest as he cried out his sense of loss. I'll take care of the body, not to worry, I know what to do with it. Nfia heard Lupu say, but he didn't ask or care what it was she meant. Lupus Regina looked over the torn-apart corpse and gave a light whistle. I really tore you up last night, didn't I? She said to the dead, pallid corpse with the empty death-milky eyes that stared at nothing. The corpse didn't answer her. The dead never did have much to say, and even most undead couldn't do more than grunt. She shrugged and bent down to start picking up the parts to take away and thought to herself, I guess I have to save the head, armor, and weapons for proof. I'll bet you're worth something to get my lord promoted. But your corpse, I'll bet Intima would like a snack, and maybe solution. Unless Lord Ines has any plans for you, kind of a shame really. If you hadn't gotten in the way, you and we might have gotten along. Oh well, you really screwed the pooch, or tried to anyways. Lupus Regina continued chattering to the corpse when she dragged it toward the gate. Just then Moman came into the village. She stopped as soon as he approached her. Lupu, what is it? Ines asked her. Other peasants began going in and out, and as others sobered up enough to work, they began to immediately pitch in, going out to the other gate and started hauling dragon bones. While more carts were used to clear materials, goods, or otherwise refurbished for the extra cargo. Almost every farmer had a cart and a horse or at least a mule, and not one of them was slacking beyond what it took to be able to stand up again after their earlier revelry. Lupus Regina jabbed her thumb over her shoulder toward Henry and Nfia. The blonde one here, she held up the head, killed his grandmother. The adventurer plate from when she was young was found in the belongings of this hunk of meat. Oh, how unfortunate. Ines replied. A well of pity rose for the young man as he mourned the loss. At least he isn't alone. When everything was said and done, it took most of the village's wagons to load up the bones, but when that was ready, their client wasn't. It was evening the day after the battle when the adventurers and their client met up in the house designated for the hero Moman. They sat around the table while Lupus stirred the cast-iron pot. The fragrant smell of cooked meat and vegetables wafted over the table. It was, in Ines's view, somewhat improved. Her cooking skill seems to have gone up, not much, but a little. He considered that and filed it away for later. I'll need to see if the skill console is still accessible in the creation room. I may not be able to make new NPCs, but being able to analyze the ones I have would be really helpful. I'm just asking for another 2 days, that's all. Of course I'll pay you for your time again, but I just need to get ready for what I'm going to see when I go back. I know Granny is dead. I just need to prepare myself before I collect her body, Nfia said with a quiet shiver that showed he was still suppressing how he really felt. Another 2 days is fine by me as long as you have the coin. This has already been an adventure and a half, so a paid vacation isn't a bad idea. Peter admitted. I don't mind either, any chance to hang out with the love of my life, Lupu? Lucru twinked, and without even blinking, Lupu stuck her ladle in, took out a tiny lump of meat, put it on her thumb, and flicked it faster and harder than an arrow with her forefinger. It flew straight and true, into Lucru's mouth, knocked him backwards from his chair, and tumbled with a thud onto the floor. He pounded his chest and coughed at the unexpected bit of meat in his mouth, and lay there for a full half a minute before he groaned and began to rise and right at his chair to reseat himself. You're so merciless, Lupu my love. Better remember that. She flashed a predatory grin. I'll miss this, Nina said with a breathy sigh. What's that? Dine inquired, his rounded face somewhat red. She answered him. I'm done. This is my last journey as an adventurer with the Swords of Darkness. Nina replied. Wait, are you serious? Peter asked. What about your sister? Weren't you going to do something about that? Nina clutched her staff in her lap. Yes, I haven't given up on that, but this trip has taught me something. I'm taking a lot of risks for no great gains. I'll never get my sister back like this. It's been how long, and I don't even know if she's alive or dead anymore? For all I know she died a year ago or more. Even if she is alive, this isn't getting me closer to my goal. I need to do something else. What, exactly? Peter asked. The rest of the team narrowed their eyes, suspecting insanity was to follow. Nothing you need to worry about, besides, you don't let women on the team so. I never should have been here to begin with. Nina confessed, I might have been lying to you all. I'm a woman, and lucrute if you ask me to prove it. No jokes were forthcoming, instead they looked her up and down and reappraised her in a way they never had before. Little things began to click into place for them all. Her habit of bathing alone, relieving herself alone, the loose clothing that she always wore. Huh? Go figure, lucrute said and scratched his head. Well, I guess all we can do is wish you good luck with whatever it is you're doing. Look, I was going to wait until we got back and collected our pay, but I was thinking about quitting too, Peter said, and all eyes were on him. He gave those at the table around him a sardonic half-smile. That fight, and the one before, showed me limits I can never reach. If I continue doing what I'm doing, I'm just going to die a pointless death, and take my team down with me. You may improve with time, you know, Ainz said to the young man, who put his hands on the table and folded them together with fingers interlocked. You're a good man, Mr. Moman, but what I saw out of you and your partner is a sign that some people aren't meant to rise to the top, and some people are born ready to be there. I'm part of the former. I was the best fighter in my village, I wanted to be adamantite ranked, and I thought if I could only work hard enough, that was possible. Peter gave a snort. We had big dreams, the swords of darkness. We dreamed more than we ever had any right to. He took out the little black stone dagger that was the symbol of the bond of his team. Now that I know how far away that dream is, I might as well be a turtle dreaming of having wings, or a fish dreaming of walking down a street or climbing a tree. Peter's fingers fidgeted with one another when he turned his attention to Nfia. We'll get you home, we'll show the guild what Mr. Moman and Miss Lupo accomplished, see them get the rank they should have. Then after that? Peter looked toward the window. It looks like this village needs more hands, maybe I can lend mine to it. We need good people. And this is a good place to live, Henry said with inviting warmth. Lupo scooped up bowls of stew and began to fling them along the table, stopping them perfectly in front of every person. The decision is yours of course, and I can understand it. Perhaps you should pass on your skills here, Ainz suggested, offering some hope to the young man that he had not wasted his time. Dine and lucrute traded glances. Wow, lucrute said and tapped his foot. Look, you know the thing I wanted to do. But Lupo was right, what am I going to do, dump corpses at the feet of their parents? I might as well stab them again. Maybe it made sense years and years ago, but now? No. And the truth is that I want to be with my team, even its trickiest member. He winked at Nina, who rolled her eyes. This is why I bound my breasts tightly down. Pervert, she said, and lucrute had the decency to blush. Dine was the last of the swords of darkness, I think. I think I want to keep trying out there. I'm sorry, but I worked too hard on my magic to stop now. When I've reached the limits of my skill, if there comes a time I can go no farther, I will come back here again. Please, stay alive until then. He reached down and took the little black dagger and, setting it on the table, he began to slide it over to Peter. No, Peter said and put a hand up with his wrist on the wood. Keep it. As long as one of us is out there, the swords of darkness are not gone. Welp, guess that means some of you have a new redhead neighbor, Britta said with a bemused expression. Lucrute gasped and clasped his hands together. Miss Lupo is staying here. Oh, I knew it. You do love me. Britta smacked him on the back of the head. No, you imbecile. I mean me. He looked up at her with a sheepish, taunting smile that led her to sigh with exasperation. I always fall for this one's antics. Britta groused, and the gathering fell to idle chatter until the time came to rest. When Ainz and Lupus Regina were alone at last, she approached him and began to remove his armor. She was halfway through the process when she inquired of him, Moman, what will you do about bathing? Ainz reached up and stroked his square jaw. Right, I can't very well return to Nazareth like this. And I would very much like a bath. He raised an arm and sniffed. Sweat, yes, I definitely need a bath. Lupus Regina hung her head and instinctively became formal. I like the smell of a supreme being. My lord does not stink. Ainz chose to let the comment pass and replied only, I would still like a bath. I'll visit the nearby river tomorrow. When he was down to his regular clothes, he flopped down in the bed, and turning his eye toward the first of the maids to earn his unreserved trust, he gave a single firm order. "Guard." She seemed to stiffen, and her wolf-like nature became more obvious. It was like watching the spirit of a loyal hound emerge from within one of his friend's children. If only they'd known, they wouldn't have left. He reflected, and finally drifted off to sleep. Chapter 18. Ein stood at the edge of the river. The water was clean and perfect. The little noise of the babbling waters as they ran over rocks was almost a kind of musical accompaniment. He wasn't wearing his armor at the moment, rather he was wearing a robe that was hastily put together for him at his request by Henry Emmett. "Why would you take a bath dressed?" she had asked with a cockeyed look. "It is a custom in my country to wear one of these. I may have left my home, but it is still part of me," Heinz had answered, and that was that. The alacrity with which she'd worked was surprising. She snatched a few unused bolts of fabric from someone, rushed back through her own door, and with fingers moving like she was a master swordsman with her needle, which was her weapon of choice, she stitched an improvised robe together for him to use. Her hands held it out at the shoulder and her head bowed with humility. "It's a bit of a hasty job, but I hope it will do." He reached out to take the robe from her, his hand on the collar, but she hadn't moved. She was obviously tense. "Something on your mind, Henry?" Heinz asked and drew back his hand. She lowered the robe and raised her head. "May I ask your advice, Moman?" She bit her lower lip and waited until he nodded and took a seat. "I've been asked to take the role of the next chief. I'd talked to Lupo about it, but Henry stopped speaking and, carrying the robe to the table to set it between them, she claimed a seat herself." "You think she'll tell you to do it, and you don't want to hear that?" Heinz guessed. The way the village girl bit her lip was answer enough. "I agree with her," Heinz replied. "Could I tell you a story?" he asked. She looked up at the square-jawed, dark-haired, towering warrior figure, and waited. There was a man who had friends, his friends had children, and they had wonderful times together, he and all of them. It was the happiest time of the man's life, because he had no family of his own outside of them. Then something happened, and his friends were taken away. All that was left behind was him and their children. The children lacked direction, they were sad, they were confused and hurt, and every time he looked at them, he saw the sense of loss in their eyes. Faced with their desperate need, he chose to take care of them himself, because there was nobody else to do it. Heinz wished very much for his helmet at that moment to hide his face, but as he spoke, he did his best to present an expression of stoicism. How successful he was, without a mirror he was unsure. "So, I'm supposed to be like the one in that story?" Henry asked. She formed a self-deprecating smile, put an arm on the table, and propped her cheek on her palm when she looked up at the dark warrior. "If you like," Heinz suggested. "You don't have to say yes, there may be others willing to take the role. But you are young, full of ideas, and that young man, he's an important figure. If you're tied to the village and he is tied to you, what does that make your village?" Henry thought that through, and red creeped over her face. "But I'm nothing, just a peasant. I can barely write my own name and only count well enough to sell my crops without getting cheated. Nfir can read and write. Have him teach you. The swords of darkness, for the most part, seem set on staying here. They're around your age, who better to guide and understand them. You'll make mistakes as a leader, but your very reluctance makes you better suited for the role," Heinz suggested as gently as he could. "So, what happened to the man in that story of yours?" Henry asked by way of distraction. "I don't really know. He's very much alive and trying to take care of his friends' children. I know he treasures them, and he's doing his best for them. Who knows how it will all work out?" Heinz stood up. "Thank you for the robe," he said and put it under his arm. Henry stood at the same moment and bowed deeply. "Thank you for the advice." He left her there, and now he stood beneath the shade of a great tree for his first New World bath. He touched the water with a toe. It was warmer than he expected, and slowly he inched his way down into it. The robe he'd been given was of green and black, the colors divided vertically and solid rather than striped for simplicity. The dyes were simple and cheap apparently, and the cloth locally made. Coupled with the green grass that he scrunched beneath his toes like a guilty pleasure in the warmth of the sun, it was still surreal. Heinz couldn't help but think, "I've never actually felt real grass before now. It's remarkable." The fresh air and clear water and the warmth in general was on a whole other level. From where he stood he could see villagers out in their fields, hoes and plows busy wringing a living from the soil. On the surface it seemed like just more back-breaking work. But this place at least is well fed, they eat what they grow, and don't need breathing masks just to go outside. My world, for all its technology, is a living hell, and for all the danger, this is paradise. His body sank down into the water and the fabric floated around him. His warm hands cupped some of the water and splashed it into his face. The water ran over his skin and the tingling sensation that came with it left him feeling truly alive. He took a long, deep breath. From what Nina told Lupus Regina, there are a lot of people who are like the worst executives back home. They ruin things for others just to get better things for themselves. Gazif's abundant gratitude to me suggests that true heroism is very rare among those with the power to actually be heroes. If left to itself, this world will be ruined eventually because nobody knows what lies far enough down the road they're on. If I take over this world, I can prevent all that from happening. He muttered, and checked his stats again. The two skeletal dragons were worth much more in terms of raw numbers, but they still barely moved his XP bar. I wonder if the world item that was part of me when the change hit, has something to do with breaking the level cap? He considered the question that came to him out of the blue, and lowered himself to sit in the river bottom. It brought the water up to his shoulders, so he allowed his arms to float freely while he thought. He could think of no way to experiment with that, which didn't risk a potentially unpleasant side effect. He turned his mind back to the idea of ruling instead. From what Lupus Regina says, Nina has a scheme in mind. It should be nurtured. Perhaps we should find her sister for her. That might be a useful way to gain her gratitude. Should I wash your back, Moman? Lupus Regina asked. He didn't look behind him to where she stood. The water itself is doing that. But if you'd like to take a bath yourself, go ahead, he said, and a moment later he heard the sound of flowing water being broken by footsteps as the brown-skinned maid stepped into the waters and sat nearby. She took the same posture as her lord, legs drawn up and arms floating freely, allowing the flow to carry away any grime. Her long red hair was up to keep it from getting wet, and around her body was a robe similar to his own, though with black and green on opposing sides. "Henry?" Ines asked, seeing it out of the corner of his eye. "Henry," she confirmed with a little smile. "Is there anything I can do?" Lupus Regina looked around, sniffed the air, and was quiet for a moment, collecting sounds. Secure that they were alone, she finished, "My lord?" "Nothing, I was just thinking about the needs this world has that requires a ruler that can guide it," Ines said. "Oh, the plan, yes, Lord Demiurge told us about that," she said with a broad and enthusiastic smile. "Ah, yes. Yes, the plan," Ines said hesitantly. "What plan?" He looked away from her and out toward the fields so his confusion couldn't be given away by his expression. "What's the next step? Do you show one of the others?" Lupus Regina asked, her admiring yellow eyes focused on her beloved master. "Yes. I'll need things from Pandora's actor, and soon. So he will have to be next. Plus I know he has no special hatred for humans, and his loyalty should be high since I am the one who created him," Ines said, though whether he was trying to explain it to her or convince himself, he himself was uncertain. "What kind of world will you make when you rule it, may I ask that, my lord?" Lupus Regina inquired. Ines's voice became airy, distant. "A world where everyone wishes to be ruled eternally. A world my friends would have been proud of. But before I can even begin with that, I need to know that all the children of Nazarick will be with me. If even one will not, I don't think I can bring myself to stay." Lupus Regina felt a sublime glow of privilege. Being so privy to her lord's mind was a deep and rare honor, something she couldn't have fathomed as even a possibility before the day they came here, or even 10 minutes ago before it happened. Yet it was so. "If you go, so do I." She grinned. "A great lord should never be without a maid. You may empty Nazarick if it comes down to it." Ines snorted. "I like your optimism, your maker made you quite the girl." She couldn't help but beam at his almost parental praise and inched a little closer to him. His hand came out of the water, droplets splashed and fell back into the river from which they came. She didn't even care that her hair got wet. Ines's hand was on her head, giving her repeated pats of praise. "My sisters will be so jealous." The thought came up immediately, and with it, a profound humility that Lupus Regina Beta couldn't help but think would never, ever fade. "No, I can't lead the village," Henry answered herself, "but I know how it can be led." she thought as the door shut in front of her and the Dark Warrior was gone. She sent Nemu out to the adventurers and Tenfear, asking them to come at once to her house. When they gathered together, she told them about the offer to let her lead the village. "Congratulations," Tenfear said, enthusiastic despite his still mournful state. "When do you take charge?" "I don't. One thing that all this has taught me is that one person isn't good at governing alone," Henry said and pointed to Peter. "You helped organize our training in ways even the goblins didn't think of." Then she pointed to Nina. "You started checking to see if anyone had magical talent that could be cultivated." Lastly she pointed to Tenfear. "You running a shop and a lab here may make this village famous." She lowered her hand and her gaze. "Everyone brings things to the table, so everyone should have a say in how things work. Not just do what I say and hope I'm never wrong. I think things are going to change, and change a lot very soon." "Why? And what are you talking about?" Tenfear asked. He looked around. The rest of the room looked no less confused. "The wise king is dead, the Dark Warrior slew 2 skeletal dragons, and I'll bet that the woman Lupu killed was famous. Mr. Moman has personally offered to reside here, and we have our walls. With all of that, this will be the safest village in Riestais. Safety is a peasant's dream, and we're going to live it." They began to understand the meaning behind what she said, and it was difficult for any of them to disagree. Henry continued, "One chief isn't enough. I want us to prepare for the future, start a council made up of our fighters, our farmers, our traders. I don't know all the details yet. I was hoping you'd all help me with that. See, before this, all we had to do was have a big meeting and everybody talked about stuff until we came to a decision. But if we get bigger, and we don't have a lord living here, we won't have that option. What if we have people choose who to represent them, and they present all their ideas to the chief? The chief then decides what to accept among their proposals. Sounds complicated, and what if the chief or the representatives aren't any good?" Tenfear suggested the obvious problem. Henry scratched her head and thought it over. "I suppose that's possible. We've had plenty of bad lords over the years. But we can just have everybody pick new ones every few years. They have to keep asking people to let them do the job, and besides, that way we can always get new ideas flowing and not." Henry sighed. "Our chief was a good one, but he never liked change. We need people open to new ideas and not set in their ways. So new people every 5 or 6 years will keep new ideas coming." What do you all think? Should I present this to the village? You've all seen a lot more than I have, that's why I brought it to you first." Henry bit her bottom lip as looks traded back and forth. "A lord took my sister as a plaything. I like any idea that keeps that from happening," Nina said, clutching her staff against her body. "This might be worth a try, and if it doesn't work out, it can always be abandoned and the old system picked up again," Nina suggested, and that spurred more positive expressions from the rest. Henry sighed with relief. Her shoulders slumped as nervousness at presenting the novel idea finally fled. "All right, I'll present it to the village after you've all gone back to Irantal to finish your task. The village will be waiting for you."